Good afternoon, dear compatriots, dear journalists. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Today, at this press conference, we dedicate it to the most important subject. It pertains to a new conceptual framework on the following. In this unique Mars, the militarized security zone should be created. Within the powers of the Ombudsman, a comprehensive study was carried out and evidence collected which come to attest to this very fact. The conceptual framework is based on international rules and I will provide the rationale today. Moreover, during this press conference we shall submit to you only and exceptionally evidence. On the basis of specific evidence we shall arrive at conclusions. First and foremost, it is of most important significance in the context of this process is the demarcation of the borders and several factors that contribute to it. We shall begin to present these factors to describe the real situation and how it should be, based also, among others, on international experience. Of course, in Azerbaijan, Armenophobia is elevated and an organized propaganda of hostility on an institutional level of high degree. We shall display to you a selection, not an exhaustive one, of videos that promote Armenophobia and hostility by the President of the Republic of Azerbaijan. Armenia has no value. It's really a colony managed from abroad. It's an artificial state created on ancient Azeri land. Azeri soldiers are chasing out Armenians like dogs. This was mentioned during the war and became a source of inspiration throughout the world for Azeris, one of the mottos. Another one, we shall continue to push out these liars. He refers to Armenians. They have no conscience, they have no ethics, they don't even have brains. For 30 years, that, referring to Artsakh, Fizuli, Varanda, was in the hands of jackals and wild beasts. The remnants in Fizuli are attesting to Armenian fascism. Armenian is not even a colony, it's not even worthy of being a servant. We shall not forget and we do not forget about our ancient lands. It shall become the dimension of our subsequent work. We are working in this direction. Yerevan, Khanate, Zangezur, Gocha, Sevan Lake, that is, are our historical territories. This should know the entire world and our young generation. Yerevan is our historic land and we Azeris have to return to those historic lands. This is our political and strategic objective. And we must gradually get closer to this objective. We also have studied this high-level generated hostility and social networks and other domains and platforms that reflect it. I will just provide one example of each. Like I mentioned, chase out like dogs as an expression by Azeri president became a mobilizing call during the war and a hashtag among all Azeris in the world. You just see examples. These are real users. In the wake of these publications, the Azeris have disseminated over the internet that these are fake users, but they are real users. We have evidence. Let history deliver this time as it should. The Turkish president and Ataturk are combined on this image, and the social media domain was awash in this publication. It was obvious that they refer to the genocide and that this time history will go on the right course. Torture before killing. The war started. You're also on the battlefield. And if an Armenian child appears on the battlefield, will you kill it or will you provide mercy? We have, in our report, together with the Ombudsman of Artsakh, we have ascribed special significance to this section on children. I would like to specifically mention that we are receiving assistance in translating from from Azeri or Turkish, from our Oriental Studies Department, high-class specialists in the Yerevan State University. These translations are impeccable, they are direct quotes. I shall demonstrate to you a next batch of evidence. We have selected only several videos, 3 pieces of footage. One pertains to considering the cruelty of the scene, one pertains to beheading, decapitation, the other pertains to cutting off an ear or mutilating a body, and the third one pertains to beating up an Armenian POW. Please pay attention. What's of utmost significance for us is that these military servicemen who have tortured our compatriots, civilians Armenian or military servicemen Armenian, they are using the same verbatim words that the Azeri president mentioned. There is a direct link, they are verbatim quotes, they are translated, there are Armenian and English subtitles under the video. So there is a direct linkage here. Of course, we will not show you the decapitation footage completely. This is the beheading video. This is Gennady Petrosyan, where offense, mockery, rejoicing at the beheading is simply so huge that you cannot humanly comment on it. What's most important, they use the same words. We can supply you with the text later. We will disseminate this video internationally. They're talking about revenge. They installed a cut-off head on a pig's body, demonstrating their attitude towards Armenians. I will request to show the next video now. This is already cutting off the ear. It's blurred, of course, but we have to show it for you to see the words they're using, not just to get the blame of us. This is one of the commanders of the Azerbaijani army. Here's what he's saying. The translation is available in the subtitle. He says, "I promised my friend Armenian ears. I have to take this to my friend for him to feel ingratiated." So, in a demonstrated way, by mockery. Moreover, in these videos of cutting off ears, there are words that make it obvious that we have come to exterminate the Armenian race, the Armenian type. We will show you the next video now. This is a civilian individual being beaten. And can we increase the volume? And please watch the captions. It is obvious that they're using verbatim the same words. Jackals, you're not humans, you're godless, you're infidels, you're not people, you have no feature of the human person, we will exterminate you. We're the humans, you're not the ones. We have a God, you are godless. When our compatriot, the civilian person, says in response that I'm a proponent of peaceful coexistence.
Всех штабов перебил. Вот меня, конечно, не а рядом с ним Шимон и Наушев.
Մյուս
The next video pertains to the next batch of evidence about firing. You know that the Azeri military are firing in the immediate neighborhood of peaceful settlements in this unique region of Armenia.
Հիմա մենք
This is in the middle of Yeghvard and Agarak villages, like I had published before. From this segment all the way to Agarak and Yeghvard villages, the whole territory is even less than 1 kilometer. Moreover, I have to mention that we have also other evidence that attests to this firing and attests to the fact this firing continues. Our most recent surveys of the local population has demonstrated that in these very recent days, the Azeri armed forces have been launching fires on Nerkinhand, Agarak, and Yeghvard, and several other villages, Shikahog and Srashen, among others. We have also studied the types of weapons, and this takes us to the next batch of evidence. We have studied the types of weapons that the Azeri armed forces mostly use for this fire. We have looked at their lethal effective distance. We will now demonstrate these. This is also done by an expert assessment. All these weapons and the fire therefrom, we have obtained during our fact-finding missions and expert assessment. You know, we have a Department for the Protection of the Rights of Military Servicemen, and we have cooperated also with our military, of course, together with the inhabitants of our communities. I will submit to you now. You saw all this evidence, and now I will, before moving on to the international standards in demarcation of borders, I would like to pose a question. The soldiers standing at the border and firing into Armenia, when the Azeri president utters those words, is he not their supreme military commander? He is their supreme military commander. It's the words of his their military commanders that we have to come to Zangezur, to Yerevan, that the Armenians should be exterminated, and the military servicemen are replicating those words. Armenia is a worthless country. No opportunity is used to erode the dignity of the Armenian nation and an individual Armenian. This person, the president of Azerbaijan, with respect to the soldiers that are firing over Syunik or about to do it, he is their military commander, isn't he? He is saying that this is our strategic and political vector. Therefore, all of these is of principal significance for the conceptual framework that we propose. In general, the basis of demarcation of borders should include the most important principles. Our detailed study has revealed facts that I'm fully confident in. One of the most important principles is the rule of law, democracy, and respect for human rights in the process of demarcation of process. By international human rights law, every process of demarcation of borders should be based on human rights. Moreover, this is not an alternative, but rather a binding requirement. It should be based, one of the bases should be human rights. Moreover, the human rights is such a basis that, lest it is protected, the lawfulness of the entire process crumbles immediately. Another international principle is respect towards the dignity of the population along the borders and protection of their rights, ensuring natural course of life of the people along the borders, security, peace, accountability, visibility, and sufficient information. And of course, all of this should be taken care by professional committee work carried out in advance, involving specialists, engineers, surveyors, historians, Local population should be consulted and cooperated with. My field trips have come to attest that during the Soviet period, the demarcation of borders used methods which the documentation of which has been preserved, and it should be used currently. Lake now reflect on the basis of international standards about as to what problems exist in Gerharkunik and Syunik. I mentioned Syunik because there are problems there, but we also have some in Gerharkunik. Let's start with the blatant trampling on human dignity. It is obvious, and we're talking about peaceful population, first and foremost children. There is real jeopardy over the right of life. You saw the fire that is launched from the other side of the border. In the immediate neighborhood of Yervart, Agarak, Sarashen, Shikahoch, Nerkin-Hand. For example, I've been to the Nerkin-Hand village myself and witnessed firsthand. The school is 500 meters away from the Azeri military outposts, and they're firing. So, if any international organization or structure may say that this is in the best interest of the children, physical and psychological blatant violations of the physical and psychological integrity, violating children's rights. Nerkin-Hand, Shurnukh, Vorotan. In Shurnukh, it's been a lot of discussions about this, but no one is trying to understand what the state these children are in. Who's been there knows in one segment of the road, it's the so-called Azeri territory, and the Azeri military bearing weapons are present there. A few steps away, several meters away, it's our border guards who are heroically serving there. And there is also Russian border guards. So here's the question I want to ask. Is this in the best interest of the children? Of course, our soldiers are there to ensure the right to life of our compatriots, and the Russian peacekeepers and the Russian border guards also have an important role. But what are they there for? In order to protect our compatriots. Very well then. But is it in the interest of the kids that the next side of the street, they're just playing there, riding their bicycles? Of course not. Is there an international organization that will try to persuade us that this is a normal situation? Blatant violations of the right to property. We're talking about several situations here. The first is people. They have lawful property, titles issued by public agencies of the Republic of Armenia or Soviet Union. Holding their lawful titles, they cannot enjoy physical access to the land plots that are their property because they're so-called Azeri. They have cadastre titles in their hands. And another situation, there are plots of lands or houses that are under direct aim of the armed forces of Azerbaijan, and for this very reason people just cannot cultivate the land or use it because they're firing shots. For example, we were in the Sarashen villages, and the villagers told us that I was walking in daytime with my grandchild when he was fully visible in the to till the land. Fires were shot, and because of that, the person didn't have the possibility to work on his leg. This is jeopardizing the right to life and the right to property. And then about the violations of the right to property, of course, this villages. This is the situation in quite a few villages of ours: Arabuz, Khoznavar, Khanatsakh, Shurnukh, Davidbek, and a number of others. Holding land title, there is another important issue that I would like to flag here. This is of utmost importance. In these fact-finding missions, a number of public agencies, since we are now cooperating with them and carry out important joint work, let me just flag that there was this opinion or the rationale that this is how it should be, what can we do? This is based on the old maps. For 30 years, our public agencies they ignored that it may be Azeri land and issued those titles. Well, that may be the case, but this is not the argument that we should use. In reality, the land title cadastre issues papers should underlie, be the basis, the foundation of the demarcation of the borders. Without the study of cadastre titles, there are even locations when they should enjoy priority, these documents, because the principle is clear. The individual, the human rights are in the basis. I'm looking at it from the human dimension. I have a government-issued title that's been given to me, and because of some intergovernmental issues, I've paid taxes, I've paid property tax. Why should I be deprived of my property or house? I don't care. I want my property back. I'm referring in particular to the responsibility dimension of the Azeri armed forces. All of these documents should be put to good use in the discussions during the negotiations and so forth. Moreover, we have looked and raised the International Court of Justice case law, which also states that the land titles should be in the basis of the resolution, and sometimes they should enjoy priority in the demarcation process of the borders. Apart from that, the fundamental significance of the land titles is also referred to in the OSCE UN guidance. There is OSCE guidelines pertaining to the process of demarcation of borders, and this is one of the most important highlights issue there. Another issue from the rights perspective is the right to use gardens, orchards, and pastures. People are deprived of this, or it is simply impossible. We already have situations when in Gherar-Konik, for example, in Karavachar or Syunik, ruminants and cattle has crossed the borders and they had problems bringing them back or had violating the rights to economic activity or doing business. The first and foremost example here is in the Gherar-Konik region, in the administrative territory of Sotk. By a resolution of the government of Armenia, on the basis of the law on the state border of the Republic of Armenia, 200 hectares of land have been allocated to an organization to do business. On 75 hectares, this organization has carried out investment, $5 million US worth, as they claim. You have seen this on video. But this territory that has been allocated by a resolution of the government of the Republic of Armenia on the basis of the law of the Republic of Armenia on the state border, on over 75 hectares, now there are Azeri troops present which deprive them of using the land and also using the pastures. I have forwarded this case to the representative of the Armenian government in the ECTHR in order to launch an intergovernmental complaint. Using water resources, impossibility of accessing. There are issues in Gherar-Konik about Karavachar here. The most salient example is the community of Mehri, in particular Mehri Gate, Zvara Gate or Ayri Jur tributary, which starts at 3,500 meters of altitude, and because of the melting of snow about August, it becomes flooding water and joins Mehri starting from August, because the slow snow melts in August. It joins Mehri and fully takes care of 90% of Mehri population demand for water. In particular, I'm referring to Agarak, Shvanizor, Narnadzor and Alvang villages and the town of Mehri. Using the right to use water resources is enshrined as one of the SDGs of the UN organization. It's one of the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. This leads to serious problems for our peaceful population, but this is also a result of Azeri policy, the hatred that I referred to isolate completely Armenia and whatnot. And coming to a final batch of issues, another important highlight. Through these days, in my assessment from the perspective of human rights, there is quite controversial are also the provocations that pursue the objective to inconvenience the population, peaceful population of Sunni and first and foremost children. The appearance of armed Azeri servicemen along the roads that link peaceful settlements in Sunni. Please pay attention. I am specifically underlining the words armed servicemen because they're also representatives of their border guards. I don't care whether it's border guards or armed forces because they are weapon-bearing people, Azeris, who simply 2 or 3 months ago you just saw how they were torturing and beating up our compatriots. Which is why sometimes they provide counter arguments to me from the expert community or in our discussions with the public agencies. They tell me, you know what, they are border guards and they're somewhat different, they pursue a different objective. Okay, I understand when they patrol the green border, oversee the borders, that's understandable and their functions are different. But we also should look at the context. In the profound hatred-based policy context conducted by Azerbaijan, we're talking about people in military uniform bearing weapon, Azeri servicemen. This is the criterion for me, rather than whether they're border guards or army people. Posting Azeri signposts and flags. With this respect, my colleagues keep telling me all the time, not any longer, but initially a question arose, okay, what does the flag and the signpost have to do with human rights? Because the Azeris use these flags and signposts as a pretext to bring over their armed military servicemen in order to protect these signposts for Armenians not to damage them. So that's what remained for them to do, to come and protect those hallowed signposts. Is it not obvious that they're using this as a pretext for the movement of the military? And for this very reason, because of installing these signposts, serious human rights issues emerge. For example, in order to get from Kapan to Sikaho, Serashen, Jakaten, or Nerkinhand, and Tsav villages. When you travel to these villages, we've been to all these villages. People avoid even traveling or going to see a doctor or to the hospital at night time or when it's dark because of these Azeri armed forces. No one seems to discuss this. When the so-called road sometimes meanders and becomes a Azeri road, I've raised this issue officially already once. What would happen if, for example, a car accident happens, an Azeri or an Iranian vehicle hits an Armenian one, or two Armenian vehicles crash? Everything is possible. Our military and our armed and the border guards are heroically serving. I would like to underscore this once again. But it's advised, for example, to travel fast through these segments, because if you travel slowly, the Azeris may view this as a provocation. Okay, well, let's say there is hypothetically an accident or an incident. Who's going to take care of the rights of our people? Does this mean that intergovernmental territorial jurisdiction, that it will be the Azeri investigative bodies that will come and investigate the incident? This process is new. We've raised the issue and we shall be persistent in. This is also coming to test that when I say at this stage there should be a demilitarized zone there so long as these issues have not been regulated or there is no certainty about them. Military outposts in the immediate neighborhood of schools. Nerkinhand is the most brilliant example. There is about 500 meters between the school and the Azeri military outpost. Yes, our school, where kids are studying. It's impermissible.
Անթույլատրելի արագությամբ գործընթացը
The process takes place in impermissible speed under the threat of war.
Մեխանիկական մոտեցումներ
There are mechanical approaches to the demarcation of borders with improper legal grounds or absence thereof, lack of certainty and lack of predictability about the involvement of the local population in the process.
Մյուսը սահմանային բնակիչների
The
բնականon
natural and traditional lifestyle has been completely disrupted of the border population. In this situation, it is obvious that our border population are deprived of their traditional lifestyle that they've been accustomed to. It's completely, I'm emphasizing this is an international principle. Even the terms that I use are borrowed from international rules. Everything has been described. The right to life of the border population, their physical safety has been threatened really and ostensibly. This is obvious. Considering all this, that all of this has resulted in blatant violation or jeopardizing human rights, and we saw that the human rights are in the basis of everything. The presence of Azeri military, whether it's the army or the border guards or whatever, considering that they also have a public policy and their supreme military commander has set completely different political objectives, talking about ethnic cleanses and genocidal policies. We could remember the December 10 military event that drew obvious parallels between the Armenian genocide crime and those who perpetrated it, linking it both to the July 1918 Baku massacres or the escalation in June of 1920 or the 2020 September-November military escalation. Therefore, consequently, the essence of our conceptual framework put forth is the following. A demilitarized safety zone should be created in Syunik at least 5 to 7 kilometers wide. This is an approximate estimation, based on evidence, based on the lethal firing range of the weapons that the Azeri military are using to fire shots and continue to this day, also considering the rights of people and the protection of road infrastructure and the controversies that arise there. The demilitarized safety zone should be 5 to 7, at least 5 kilometers wide. Moreover, I would like to particularly emphasize that these issues I have already submitted to the international structures. Before that, I also submitted to them the violations of human rights. I mentioned that this process has to immediately be halted and reviewed in principle. From a number of our colleagues, yesterday we communicated with them. They asked us not to publish this at this stage, but we have received responses from our international colleagues. They already have taken notice of these issues and are working on it. The international community has an important job to do here. This requirement is presented to the international community, because this is in principle against everything that they've been building, creating over years. The guidelines, conventions, human rights requirements are all going down the drain by this. Therefore, there needs to be a resolution in principle. We cooperate. I would like to highlight with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Armenia, our ambassadors, within the scope of our powers, fully abiding with the principle of the independence of the human rights defender. I would like to express my commendment of the cooperation level of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs with us, since it's important to work jointly over these issues. We're talking, after all, about the rights, protection of the rights of Armenian citizens, people living along the borders. Thank you, and I'm willing to answer questions now.
Չեմ
Which
կարող ասել, որովհետև շատ
Which
լուրջ
international structure did
այդպես
you get
կառույցներից,
responses from? I cannot say
որոնք
because
այս
these are
ոլորտում
very
ակտիվ են,
serious
միջ
structures
կառավարական
active in
կառույց
this
կարող եմ ասել,
intergovernmental
բայց
structures
չեմ
that I
կարող
can
անունը
tell
նշել,
you.
որովհետև մենք
I can't
այնօր
mention the
ուղղություն
name
ունենք,
because we have an
հաշվառող
agreement
արծիվկայուն բնույթը,
considering the
բայց
sensitive
ես ուրախ
nature
եմ
of the
նշել, որ
issue,
այս
but I'm glad to
բացասող
mention
հարցերը տեղ են
that these
հասնում
issues that
եւ
we
նորից եմ
raise
նշում, մենք
have
երբ
gotten to
ուղղակում
where
ենք
they belong.
միջազգային կառույցներին,
And I reiterate, when we
մենք
send this
նշում ենք
information to
նաեւ
international structures,
ապացույցներ,
we
կոնկրետ,
also
ինչպես ես
attach
նշեցի,
specific
տեսա,
evidence, like
ես
I did a
որևէ
while ago. This is not
սուբյեկտիվ
subjective or
գնահատական
biased or
եւ
partial
առասարակ չեմ
opinion,
տալիս, բայց
and I'll
հիմա
refrain from that
չկրեցի։
even now.
Բացառապես
It's
ապացույցներ,
exclusively
խումբ
evidence-based
ապացույցներ,
by batches,
տեղեկություններ,
information,
փաստեր,
data,
եւ դրա
facts,
հիման վրա
and it's
ակնհայտ է,
obvious
որ
on
գալիս ենք հանդիպում
all
ենք
of the
այս
basis of
եզրակացության,
this that we
ես
arrived
իմ
at these
հանդիպումների
conclusions. During our
ժամանակ
my
միջազգային մի
meetings
շարք
with representatives of
միջկառավարական կառույցների
intergovernmental international
ներկայացուցիչների հետ,
organizations, and
մասնական
during my
հանդիպումների
private
ժամանակ
meetings,
այս
I've
ամենը
been
նշել եմ,
raising
բացա
all
չեմ
of these
կարող
issues. I
վերապահել,
cannot disclose it
որովհետև
at this point. The process
անմիջացում process-ի
is
մեջ
in
է,
the pipeline,
եւ
and I
նշել եմ եւ
insisted that
պնդել
there
եմ, որ
should
պետք է
be
լինի
a demilitarized
ապառազմականացված
safety zone
անվտանգության
because we're
գոտի,
dealing
որտեղ
with
մենք գործ
the
ունենք այն
military
երկրի
servicemen
զինված
of
ուժերի
of
ծառայողների
a
հետ,
country
ում գերագույն գլխավոր
whose supreme
հրամանատարի
military
հայտարարված
commander has declared that
ռազմավարական
their
ու
strategic
քաղաքական
and
նպատակն է
political objectives is
նպատակներն են էթնիկ
genocidal and
զոհերի ու ցեղասպան բնույթ։
pursues ethnic cleansing.
Պարոն Թաթյան, այս ամբողջ ընթացքում դուք փաստահավաք տարբեր առաքելություններով երբ մարզում եք եւ հիմա էլ որոտանում երբ խրամատավորվում են արդեն ադրբեջանական սահմանապահները, կարծես թե սահմանապահները, պետական մարմինները պարզաբանում են, որ իրենք անվտանգության խնդիր են լուծում, անհանգստանալու կարիք չկա, դիսոնանս չկա ձեր հայտարարությունների եւ մեր պետական մարմինների, որտեղ ամեն անգամ երբ դուք ահազանգում եք, մենք որևէ պահի ստանում ենք պարզաբանում, որ մտահոգության կարիք չկա, անվտանգության խնդիրներ են լուծում այդ մարդիկ։
Գիտեք, ես բարձրացնում եմ
You've
հարցերը,
had
որովհետև ես
various
պետք է
fact-finding
հրապարակային նաեւ
missions
աշխատեմ,
in the provinces.
ուշադրությունը հրավիրելով միջազգային
When they dig
հանրության։
trenches already in
ես ինչու ներս եմ
Vorotan, these
բարձրացնում
very
հրապարակային միշտ
border guards, the governmental bodies claim they're pursuing security objectives. Has there been a response by our public agencies? Every time you raise the alarm, we get a comment from them, no cause for concern, they're only addressing security issues. I raise issues because I have to work publicly, drawing attention of the international community. The reason I am raising these issues publicly all the time, of course there are some issues that I refrain from doing so about, but I try to work as publicly as possible, because the international community unfortunately works like that. You need to guide them through open public pressure that matters. Our colleagues, for example, we cooperate with the Armenian border guards, the National Security Service, with the armed forces, with the army. Every time when I go to Syunik or Gerarkunik, my meetings almost always start with the meeting with the commander of the corps there, and we discuss at great length every issue. We also have meetings and we get very important, valuable information from the heads of communities, the mayor of Kapan, the mayor of Goris, the head of community, the Mehri community heads, and of course the elders of the villages. But the most important source is our citizens and the trust we have created with them. Our citizens trust us. They continually alert us to the fact. I am aware of what you just raised. I am viewing it in the total context of the violation of human rights that I mentioned, and I consider that this is a component of the whole process in the context of human rights. And I'm asking a question. If someone can prove otherwise, that there is no matter of concern for us in terms of human rights and there is no problem, I believe it would simply be impossible. Moreover, everything that I'm saying, I tell you, goes fully against the international rules that the international structures have been putting in place for many years on end. Therefore, I think that our international colleagues should remain faithful to the principles that they have forged, the ideas they have set forth, and all of these should find a resolution eventually. I do not see. We're talking about the following. See, we're talking about peaceful coexistence. I agree as a human rights defender. Of course, people should live in peace, nations, peoples together. We, Armenians as well, have to live and do live in our country with representatives of other nations. We're dispersed throughout the world. We've always has been inclined to live side by other nations. But here's the question I'm asking. Given these conditions, can you imagine peaceful coexistence? What about the ongoing psychological suffering that Azerbaijan is causing intentionally? What about the POWs? They're extending, stalling with it artificially. They're causing suffering to their families. This is psychological torture. They're playing with the emotions of the Armenian public. This issue adds fuel to the fires of tension in our country, and they take it to more profound depths, trying to present them as subversive incursions and terrorists. So in these conditions, how could you possibly imagine peaceful coexistence? Therefore, first and foremost, these issues have to be resolved, because failing that, there is no unilateral peaceful coexistence under the constant threat of war and statements that attack your dignity. You know what? No. From day one, we've been receiving these alerts. Have you seen what's transpiring in the Azeri press against us? Large volume. With the participation of the members of the parliament, there's a broad-scale campaign with absolute offensive language. I'm not going to let it go. I'm prepared the communication and shall present to the international communities the threats and the campaign launched against the person implementing the functions of the ombudsman. We've looked at European experience and experience of other conflict zones. They're trying to determine the borders for many years. They're discussing every step, every bush. You know what criteria underlies all this? Eventually, we have to answer the most important questions. Did we get, as a result, the disruption of the lives of the border population? Did we get their rights protected? No. The natural course of life has been disrupted, tradition, lifestyle has been violated, the right to life. This is exactly in the basis of international agreements. Even the Vienna Convention on International Treaties determines that agreements concluded under the threat of use of force are invalid. What about the process pertaining to people? We're dealing with real people. I think finally, eventually, it's long overdue that the international community has to prove that when they claim that no one should be left behind, this is not just words, nice words on paper. This is a principle that should deliver in real life. And eventually, there is another important issue. Unfortunately, throughout the war, the human rights organizations were passive, and that contributed to both the increase in the violation of human rights. The political agenda superseded over human rights throughout, and unfortunately there are certain discussions and attempts to claim that human rights go against security. This incident and the situation in the Syunik, Mars and elsewhere are real examples that come to prove that human rights and democracy augment security, complement security. Security, human rights and democracy are not conflicting principles, but are complementing categories, which is why this is our international partners, and this is what I tell them, should demonstrate that in reality, democracy and human rights do guarantee and take care of security. This is what conceptual framework I propose is hinged on. You know what? I'm the ombudsman of Armenia. I think within my powers and possibilities, we do everything in order to present this to the attention of the international community. You know what? Once one of our international partners asked me a question. You're claiming there are so many violations. How do you see this eventually resolved? After all, these two nations have to coexist. I say, very well, they should. But the key to this is that if impunity is not punished, if a person that committed the crime, I'm referring to the crimes of war, it may repeat in a more cruel way, which is why a stringent response of the international community, our colleagues should follow suit. A member of Council of Europe state
Եվրոպայի խորհրդի անդամ պետությունում
does this, which another by another member of the Council of Europe state. I'm not even mentioning other structures. So security and human rights are closely interconnected, and the international community, civilized international community, should prove this on the basis of this unique platform that yes, it's human rights that can take care of security. The conceptual framework that I propose shall and can fully take care of that. Առավոտ AM, Mr. Tatoyan, the examples that you listed about the expressions of cruelty and Armenophobia, the so-called peace proponents claim that these are only characteristic to the nationalistic segments of Turkey and Azerbaijan and specific groups in the Azeri armed forces. At the same time, recently the Azeri president made a statement that they are ready to turn the page of hatred, hostility in the region. What's your
Նախ խոսքը վերաբերում է պետական աջակցությամբ
We're talking about state-supported public policy. I conveyed yesterday message to the UN Human Rights Council because we are an A-class consultant. I mentioned specifically, highlighted to all countries members of the UN Human Rights Council that in Azerbaijan there is ethnically motivated crime against Armenians, killings first and foremost, and that's been attested by a number of rulings of the ECTHR. Let's say Mankuchan and Gurgen Makaryan or Ramil Safarov case, which Manvel Saribekyan's case, other cases. The ECTHR has clearly acknowledged that this is about ethnically motivated killings that have been encouraged by high-ranking public offices of Azerbaijan. Therefore, we're talking about institutionally based policies. This is attested to by the Artsakh Ombudsman's joint report with me during the war. Fully evidence-based, no judgment, verbatim quotes only. Real social media users, cultural figures, athletes, statements, and it obviously illustrates that Armenophobia is generated by high-ranking political authorities headed by their president. You saw his quotes. I didn't invent anything there. Secondly, they're encouraged by cultural and athletic figures. There was this famous case, one of the sporting clubs, head of the sporting clubs that was called Qarabağ made a statement. You've only seen one. You know how many more such calls to action exist. And all of these atrocities, you see, these people don't cover their faces. Imagine the degree of cynicism, their cheek, with open faces. That commander tells his servicemen, I promised my friend who has lost 2 legs to bring him 2 Armenian ears. You know why he doesn't cover his face? Because he knows he's not going to be punished. And their state machinery is only going to encourage him. Not to mention that we have even cases, we have just proven data that they are being incentivized and get awards. Turning the page of hatred, a whole generation has been brought up on this hatred and Armenophobia. You need to seriously address this issue, but before that, we need to have appropriate means in order to assure the physical safety of the Armenian population. The right to life and other rights should be protected, and I reiterate, peaceful coexistence is of utmost importance. Of course, hatred is always and has always been bad, but I don't imagine in these conditions how this peaceful coexistence should, if they declared strategic and political objectives. We do have evidence. Are these shots fired just as an accident? With your permission, Mr. Tatoyan, yesterday, I don't know whether you heard or not, the former governor of Syunik said that Azeris, under the guise of institutions from other countries, are buying everything up in Syunik, whatever is up to sale. inflating the prices. Are you aware of that, and to what extent does it violate the rights of the people there? I haven't heard about that anything. I don't know the source of this information. We took notice of what you just said. I will look into it. One more follow-up question. In the recent period, there are many statements. It came from the Prime Minister that Shushi is Azeri, not only Shushi is Azeri. When we talk with Artsakh people in particular, for those who lived in Shushi, they're very offended by such statements. To what extent does this violate the rights of the people there? Since you already quoted the Prime Minister, any response I come up with will be deemed to be politically motivated. After, maybe we will reflect on that later. It's an important issue. I do not think it's appropriate to respond to that at this point. It won't be perceived correctly. Mr. Tatoyan, you proposed to create a demilitarized security zone. The same was proposed by Goris and Kapan leaders before even this GPS adjustment of borders. How realistic do you think is this proposal feasible, especially considering the most recent incident? Before that, they were telling that Vorotan Goris Shurnukh segment, you don't need to dig trenches. It's the Azeri and Armenian border guards who should patrol, but then they dig those trenches. How do you see whether it's realistic? Very realistic. How did they end up there? With the same success, they should get away from it. How can you imagine a road linking one peaceful Armenian settlement to the other when peaceful people, children, elderly and women traverse? How can you imagine? Is it normal that the military of another country that have been perpetrating atrocities several months ago are now manning this road? They were desecrated churches and saying, wait for us, we're coming to pillage and rape. So all of this just got pulverized and evaporated. I think this is a very realistic proposal, the one I made. It's a realistic solution. I'm not proposing 150 kilometers. I'm saying 5 to 7 kilometers at least. Considering also the use of pastures, we have serious issues with the use of pastures now because there is no demarcation, delineation of the borders. The Foreign Ministry did make a clear statement claiming that there cannot be demarcation along these borders. So it's not clear where does this border end or begin. And the ruminants and large cattle, they just get lost sometimes and cross those invisible lines. So our shepherds have to go and look out for them and become prisoners again, or end up in the hands or under the control of those military, or not be able to bring back their cattle. And we already had cases like that. Horses crossed the line in Karvajar, in Sunik, ruminants and cattle, and there are many cases that hasn't been published yet. It's clear, of course, that these issues are of principal importance. So the safety zone is also, among others, for that reason. It's very well that the Kapan mayor mentioned he knows better. They maintain daily contact with the population. They know what's transpiring firsthand. Everything I presented is not just baseless statements. So everything is evidence-based. Please put these factors side by side. You inevitably reach this conviction that these people have no right to be there bearing arms. It has to be a demilitarized zone. Yerker Media Nahit Hovanesyan, Mr. Tatoyan, about this concept of setting up a safety zone. On a more practical note, how is it going to be implemented, and what is the procedure you imagine to bring it to life? And about Kapan, we know that there has been certain shifts with respect to some roads and infrastructure. And about the airport in Kapan, how do you imagine its operation since it's in the immediate neighborhood?
Ես ինձ վերաբերող մասով ասեմ,
What pertains to me, I can tell you the practical implementation is
այդտեղ մեծ հաշվով պրակտիկայել չկա,
quite possible.
Սկի ոչ կամ միտեղ կամ տների մեջ են նստած կամ միտեղ
There is a place where they are posted between houses, they have outposts along the roads. There is a house that used to be a restaurant that now split into those things and other things. They simply have to get at a distance from those locations. The international community should initiate the practical discussion and the process itself, and they should in this process play a principal role, especially international human rights structures. As for the airport, I have to tell you there is a component here that also pertains to human rights. It's an important question that you asked. When they visited Kapan and had meetings with the locals, there were two fundamental issues raised by the local inhabitants. The first is that the operation of the Kapan airport is just to rule out the difficulties in the movement of locals. It assures for additional communication. And what matters most, it's also the right of lives that they're concerned about the people who man this airport. The two intergovernmental roads immediately overhang the airport, so that's a jeopardy. We have received the alerts by the employees of the airport that they need more secure conditions, and one can understand their concerns. Year after, in one of my visits to Sunik that I planned, there are issues in Davidbek village about the rights to property. The head of the community told us that they received alerts from the locals. We will travel there and keep this issue in the focus of our attention from the human rights perspective to understand how does it fit in our mandate. We'll look into that issue, which is of utmost importance. Thank you. The question is not about Kapan. I'm talking about the statement by Aliyev that he's repeated many times about those prisoners not being POWs but subversive agents and terrorists rather. So your position on these or international human rights organizations, what are the chances of proving otherwise and succeeding in it? Well, I will not reflect on the political component about the rationale or the reasoning behind those statements. That's not my business. My business is protecting the rights of our compatriots, civilians and POWs who are now in Azerbaijan in captivity and kept unlawfully there. They're kept unlawfully. I've responded to the statement you mentioned, and I've circulated my response in several languages to international structures. My objective here is not to respond to a politician or a head of another state, but to respond to the issues that blatantly violate the rights of our POWs and the members of their families. What is their approach, their concept? First, they were saying that about our Shirak boys, that they're terrorists because they ended up in captivity after November 9 and whatnot. We have many arguments, counter-arguments against this, that this is a blatant violation of international humanitarian law. But there is another preeminent argument that I mentioned in my response. A blatant violation of international law and humanitarian law and violation of human rights simply to make a determination whether a person is a terrorist or a subversive agent based solely on a date. because we're dealing with an ongoing military conflict,
Այդ հակամարտությունը չի
armed
դադարել, չէ։
conflict. The conflict has
Միջազգային
not
մարդասիրական իրավունքի կարևորագույն
is not yet over, isn't it?
կարևորագույն չափանիշներից է,
An important Red Cross criteria and international humanitarian law principle is that if there is an ongoing current military conflict, then it's obvious that we're dealing with POWs and civilians in captivity. Apart from that, it's important to bear in mind that, like, and you mentioned that in your question, there is already this practice after the November 9 statement that whoever is taken captive or kidnapped after November 9, some of our compatriots have already been returned who have fallen captive after November 9. So this goes against the practice and it goes against the intentions of this tripartite statement. They keep referring to item 8 all the time of this November 9 statement. I already responded to that, let me highlight again. This statement, of course, is bad that there are no deadlines there. But this item 8 in the statement, what does the date have to do with it? Let's imagine this item 8 is not there in the statement. This would have meant that they were not going to return the POWs? Of course not, because this is based, it's the most important principle of international humanitarian law, which exists without, irrespective of the will of the Israeli authorities, and the immediate return should be assured. This is not the goodwill of the Israeli authorities. It is their direct duty assumed under international treaties. And this should be interpreted without regard to the former. It's obvious that the Israelis are politicizing this issue because they feel more comfortable in the political domain, but there are no basis for this in the legal plane. There was information, I'm referring to publicly available information, that they're using this issue in order to address certain territorial issues in Artsakh. This is something that gets to the dimension of a war crime. So they should, our compatriots should return ASAP. With the support of our embassy, yesterday at the Bundestag, there was a meeting organized. There were more than 70 MPs of the Bundestag. They asked me, how can we help or what could be done? I told them, through your response over these issues, because they're trying to mislead you. This is the real situation, and this pressure is important in order for the international community, and our work is also important in order to form with the international community this approach. I want to reiterate that our representative with his team at the ECTHR works professionally. Our advocates, I know that the National Security Service is importantly involved. I see my objective in raising and exposing these issues, and we are in constant contact with the MFA here as well, cooperating with them importantly. I'll conclude at this. Thank you for your attention.